This was the last chapter of Genesis. Now, before we go on, though, Dr. Lamsa is, of course, the originator of the Aramaic work. He is the first guy to introduce the Aramaic translation of the Bible and all of its culture and the history, the everything. He is the one that's responsible for that. And of course, he is the person who was most uniquely qualified. And we have to remember that nowadays, because more and more people are getting into the excited about Aramaic, the teaching that the language of Jesus, and a lot of people are starting to translate using Aramaic, translate the Bible. But have to remember, they, like other scholars in the past, they did not know the culture. They did not know, for example, that the Aramaic language back then, classical Aramaic back then, only had about 500 different words, but each word could have 4 or 5, sometimes even 10 different meanings. And what makes the Lamsa translation so special is that Dr. Lamsa knew the context because he spoke Aramaic. He grew up with the same culture, the same situation as Jesus. And so that's what makes him unique. All right, I just like to talk about them. And of course, Dr. Erickel, Dr. Lamsa died in 1975, and Dr. Ericko has been carrying on the Aramaic work since then, which is like almost 60 years or maybe more. And so he has expanded the work. And of course, now we are presenting. I don't know that we're expanding, but we're putting this all together because there are concepts that come out of the Aramaic translation that need to be pulled out, put together, and we're going to talk about some of those tonight. And anyway, that is Dr. Ericko, and he actually mentored with Dr. Lamsa for 10 years before Dr. Lamsa's death. And I put this in here last week. I'll bring it up again. And we just have this nice, cool picture of Dr. Lamsa and Dr. Ericko in 1965. And that is when Dr. Ericko met Dr. Lamsa. And of course, he was a lot younger then, probably 26 or 27, I'm not sure. Okay, always like to talk a little bit about that. Okay, and don't like to talk about ourselves, but I am Penny, and we studied with Dr. Ericko for 13 years, and it's hard to believe that we've been doing this now for almost 17 years. So anyway, all right, and important, we're not here to convince you of anything. We're not here to coerce you. We're not here to convert you, and we're not here to condemn you, your religion, or your beliefs. But remember, you're going to hear things here that may be contradictory to how you were brought up or even your belief system now. But we're not saying we're right. We're only presenting the Bible from the Aramaic and from the ancient Near Eastern perspective. Okay. Now, just as a review, all right, so at this point in time, Jacob has died. His sons have carried him back to his roots in Canaan. Okay, now, and where we start tonight, to finish the scriptures here, Joseph and his brothers are returning to Egypt, because remember, they carried Jacob from Egypt back to Canaan, where Jacob wanted to be buried and where Joseph swore to Jacob that that's what he would do. So as we start, Joseph and his brothers are returning to Egypt. All right, Genesis 50, 14 through 18. And Joseph returned to Egypt, he and his brothers, and all who went up with him to bury his father after he had buried his father. And when Joseph's brothers saw that their father was dead, they were afraid, saying, "It may be Joseph will harm us, and perhaps he will requite us all the evil which we did to him." Okay, and the evil was they sold Joseph into slavery. They were jealous because Joseph had it. Well, number one, Joseph was favored by Jacob, all their fathers. Joseph was favored. The brothers were jealous. And so they sold Joseph into servitude or slavery, you might as well say, but that was in Egypt. Okay. So they came to Joseph and said to him, "Your father, which is Jacob, did command before he died, saying, 'Thus shall you say to Joseph, forgive, we pray you now, the trespass of your brothers and their sins. For they did evil to you, and now forgive the trespass of the servants of the God of your father.' And Joseph wept when they spoke to him. And his brothers also went and fell down before him. And they said, 'Behold, we are your servants.'" Okay. What Joseph said to them, this is really important: "Fear not, for I am a servant of God. But as for you, you thought evil against me. But God meant it for good, to do as he has done this day, to save many lives. Now therefore do not be afraid. I will provide for you and your little ones." And he comforted them and spoke kindly to them. And Joseph dwelt in Egypt, he and all his father's house, and Joseph lived 110 years. And Joseph saw Ephraim's children of the third generation. The children also of Machir, the son of Manasseh, were brought up upon Joseph's knees. Now, we talked about this thing about being brought up on it was Jacob's knees, that Manasseh and Ephraim were brought on Jacob's knees, and that was to adopt Manasseh and Ephraim, to officially adopt them, which would mean Manasseh and Ephraim were born in Egypt. But because Ephraim put them on his knees, blessed them, that was considered an official adoption, so that Manasseh and Ephraim would be Canaanites and not Egyptian. And so the reference here is just that he was making sure that, okay, Machir was a son of Ephraim. He was just making sure that these children would all be part of the Canaanites. Okay. And Joseph said to his brothers, "I am dying, and God will surely remember you and bring you up out of this land to the land which he swore to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob." And Joseph took an oath of the children of Israel, saying, God will surely remember you, and you shall carry up my bones from here with you. So Joseph died being 110 years old, and they embalmed him and put him in a coffin in Egypt. Now, notice it above, it says, God will surely remember you and you shall carry up my bones from here with you. So, but notice it says that he was embalmed and he was actually, well, they didn't bury him, but he was put in a coffin in Egypt. But the phrase, and you shall carry up my bones, actually, that did happen when you get to Joshua 24:32, and the bones of Joseph, which the children of Israel brought up from Egypt, they buried in Shechem in a parcel of ground which Jacob bought from the sons of Hamor, the father of Shechem, for 100 years, and it became the inheritance of the descendants of Joseph. So Joseph, by carrying his bones there, then they just sealed the whole Israeli family, because Joseph is now not in Egypt. That's basically what that means. Okay, and that is the end of Genesis. It's the end of Joseph and the end of the families, the original families. However, we're going to go back now to Genesis 49:22-26, and we're going to talk about Joseph. Okay, now this is from when Jacob talked about Joseph. Okay, Joseph is a disciplined son, an educated son, a fruitful bough by a spring whose branches run over the wall. A company of men quarreled with him, and being great in numbers, envied him. But in strength he bent his bow, and his arms were made strong by the hands of the mighty one of Jacob, by the name of the shepherd, the strength of Israel. And of course, that is God. Okay, may the God of your father help you, and the Almighty bless you with the blessings of heaven above, blessings of the deep beneath, blessings of the breast and of the womb. The blessings of your father have prevailed above the blessings of my forebears to the utmost bound of the everlasting hills. They shall be on the head of Joseph, on the crown of the head of him who is the prince of his brothers. Now, we talked about, as we went along, we talked about Joseph's spiritual journey. And, but one of the, well, this is part of it. All right. When he said, but God meant it for good to do as he has done this day, to save many lives. Now, we have to go back and refresh what this is talking about. His brothers sold him into slavery, servitude. Joseph was a servant to the Pharaoh. The Pharaoh took a liking to Joseph, loved him like family, and Joseph progressed, I guess, in his to be the governor of all Egypt. Okay, but the brothers, and of course everyone, including us, the brothers selling him to the Egyptians was not right. Okay, but Joseph has throughout. Joseph has maintained that was okay. I just say it was meant to be, but it was part of the divine plan, because had Joseph not been sold and not been with the Pharaoh and had won the good graces of Pharaoh, then not only his brothers, but his whole family would have died. Because remember, the famine Okay. Everyone, not just his family, but everyone went to Egypt during the famine. Why did they go to Egypt? Because Joseph, in his wisdom, he calls it his divine guidance, had stored up uh, uh, wheat and grain, whatever. He had stored that up prior to the famine starting. But remember, he had predicted the famine for 7 years. So, but had he not been sold into slavery, that was part of his divine plan. Then many people would have lost their lives, including his family. Now, the key with Joseph, and the thing is why I don't know why people don't bring him out as a better example of the guidance of listening to God. But Joseph was under the influence. I just say under the influence, but it's the guidance of God. Okay, even though we don't hear God speaking to Joseph as he did with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Joseph was in tune, period. Okay, and he was under the constant guidance of God. Though Joseph was sold, and he just he demonstrates a lot of the teachings that Jesus did. Even though he was sold as a slave and a servant. Now, ordinarily, people would really resist. They would get upset. They would be bitter. Okay, but he didn't resist. He did not get bitter. He went on and did. I'm sure he was guided in all of this. And Joseph, it was all part of the divine plan. It was his destiny. And you also saw in the last few verses here where he forgave his brothers. That's again, forgiveness. Jesus taught that over and over. And so he forgave his brothers. Now, I understand that Jesus wasn't around now, but that's going to be my point, is that Joseph, what Joseph meant. Now, this is a good rendition. This is from the commentary. What Joseph meant was, and was saying, is that he also was a human being under the care and guidance of God. His brothers were so frightened that they prostrated themselves before him as one would do when worshiping God. Now, Joseph saw his vision of the sheaves and the stars and the moon were fulfilled. Now, let's remember what that was. Remember, that was the dream. That was the dream that Joseph had before he was sold into slavery. That was the dream that the brothers didn't like, and that was the part why they got rid of him and sold him. That was the dream, because remember in the dream, Joseph saw he saw the sheaves and the stars and the moon represented his brothers at one end, and they were bowing down to him. So it was the fulfillment of this dream that Joseph saw. But he refused to see his brothers paying obeisance, I'm sorry, I can't pronounce the word, to him, for he was, after all, a human being like each of them and a servant of God. I'm sorry, but it sounds a lot like Jesus. Joseph was a loving and generously kind man who understood the ways of God and divine inner guidance. Okay, now, this is a subject that the spirit, like I said, we say we teach the spirit of the word, and we do as best we can. Sometimes we may not be able to get it across, but let's look at, okay, these are the patriarchs and some things about their spiritual journey. Okay, Abraham was called by God, and Abraham followed God's guidance, even when it pained him. Remember, he sacrificed his son, but of course, God intervened, and Isaac lived. But think about this. Now, we're just talking about in Abraham's time. All right. There was no organized religion then. There was pagan religions. Okay. And of course, pagan religions had their gods and goddesses and whatever. Okay. But so they had those. All right. But there was no organized religion like we have. Okay. And there weren't synagogues or anything at that point in time either. And he had no Bible, and there was no courses for him to take. So we're going to look at the question of, well, how and why would he, why did he follow God's guidance? How and why? Okay. So we go to Isaac. Okay. Now, Isaac was guided by God. Now, and you don't see God speaking to Isaac that much, but it doesn't matter. He was guided by God. Okay. Now, remember Jacob deceived Isaac, seemingly, and was given Jacob's blessing over his brother Esau, who was the eldest son. Okay. And so you have this deception, but then if you read, and I think we talked about this, that Isaac, even though he was blind, okay, and they were deceiving, Isaac knew. Somehow Isaac knew, okay, that, okay, this was Jacob, but he knew his inner voice, his inner guidance told him that Jacob should be the one to carry on God's work and pass it on to the descendants. All right. And then we go to Jacob. Now, Jacob, all right, Jacob, it wouldn't seem so, but Jacob, he deceived Isaac, is what we say. He deceived him, but it was really Rachel that pushed it. Okay. And so Jacob followed God's guidance and was protected throughout his ordeals. And he did have his ordeals. Okay. And his again, tradition. This is tradition versus the divine plan. Tradition versus maybe what God wanted or wants. And so Jacob followed God's guidance and was protected. All right. Now, Jacob favored Joseph. His favoritism for Joseph defied the tradition once again, because Reuben was really his eldest son, but because Joseph was from Rachel and Jacob favored Joseph, but he also knew that Joseph was the one that would be suited, that was supposed to, according to divine plan, carry on for the descendants and God's ways. All right. And he was guided by God. Jacob also did the same. He chose Manasseh over Ephraim again, because Manasseh, Ephraim was the oldest. I think I got this straight. Ephraim was the oldest. And but when it came time for Jacob to give his blessing, he just automatically gave it to the youngest over the oldest. But he defied tradition, but it was part of God's plan. Now, okay. All right. Now, how and why did they get their direction from God? I mean, let's go to Genesis 1:26-27. Then God said, let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the fowl of the air, and over the cattle, and over all the wild beasts of the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps upon the earth. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. Okay. Now, what does it mean, the image and likeness of God? What is it? Okay, now, one thing I'll say before because we're going to the New Testament, is that we see in the Old Testament, we saw Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. We see them guided by God. Okay. But when Jesus came along, okay, let's go to the bottom. Let's go to the bottom scripture first. When Jesus came along, Jesus said, God is a loving Father. Okay. And we go to Matthew 6:9-10, which of course is the Lord's Prayer. And like I said in the beginning, our Father who is everywhere. Our Father, not my Father, our Father, which means everyone, regardless of religion, regardless of anything, we're all God's children. And then then the prayer, let come your counsel or your guidance. Okay. So, but the image and likeness of God, let's go up to the top one. All right. To me, it's two things you need to understand. Okay. God is spirit. All right. And where do we get that? We get it from Jesus, but it's recorded in John 4:24. And this is from the story of the woman at the well. Okay. But we can't do the whole story. For God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship him in spirit and in truth. So, okay, so God is spirit, all right? God is love. And we just talked about the loving Father, that Jesus said, the loving Father, okay? And then we go to 1 John 4:7-8. My beloved, let us love one another, for love is from God, and everyone who loves is born of God and knows God. He who does not love does not know God, for God is love. Okay, so if we're made in the image and likeness of God, we are spirit and love, unconditionally, no questions. When we're born, after we die, forever and ever, we are spirit and love, because that is the image and likeness of God. And so what does that mean? Okay, again, it means we are all children of God, the loving Father. And we all have that Spirit of God within us as part of us. Okay, and essentially we are spiritual beings living in a human body. Okay, in a physical body. Therefore, we naturally have the capacity to love. And I think if you think about it, the capacity to love, when a baby is born, it really doesn't matter what the baby looks like, even if it's deformed or whatnot. That baby is all love. And that's the human being. That baby is all love. But what happens after we get in the world? Well, we have our ways, and we have our man-made laws and traditions and whatnot, and so we start to lose that. But what Jesus was trying to do, and Jesus was trying to get us to understand this image, that we are made in this image and likeness of God. His message was about the spiritual, which kingdom, the counsel of God. It was about us getting, receiving, and being aware that God is there and that we can receive his guidance. So Jesus changed the picture from okay, when in Jesus' time, it's like in order to get to God or whatever, you had to do your sacrifices, and you had to go to the temple, you had to do that. And in many cases nowadays, that is the belief. That's okay, not criticizing it. But what he essentially was saying, look, God's here, go to him, turn to God. So that's kind of what changed it. And so I want to share in closing, I want to share this quote from Dr. Lamsa. God is spirit, and spirit is a still small voice that brings peace and harmony to man's disturbed mind. Now, that little still small voice, we all have it. We just may not pay any attention to it. We haven't developed that because most of our religions don't have other rules and other things that we have to follow and whatnot. But I just found that quote to be so wonderful. And Dr. Lamsa he was a special person in every way, but he really had a special handle on the spiritual side of things. And and he has, all right, this book, this is a book originally by him. We reprinted it, The Kingdom of Heaven on Earth. And if you, I'm sure many of you have it. If you don't have it, you might want to get your hands on it, because if we're to understand if we're to understand the way of spirit and Jesus' teachings in the world today, this is just a really great book to do it. And I can tell you, I think we did this book in 2015. It is not a book that you take and you read cover to cover. Okay, I've done that. I can't tell you over and over again. We'll pick this book up. It's technically it's based on the Beatitudes, but it's not just the Beatitudes. He just has a way of pulling it all together. So anyway, enough of that. It is available in ebook and paperback.